Jerome Wade was 42 years old, and until that Tuesday night, he believed he had built something worth coming home to. He had spent 16 years turning a single used truck and a contractor's license into a six-figure business. 14 employees, 2 investment properties, a warehouse, and a family home he paid for in cash. He was the kind of man who measured twice and cut once, in work and in life. The kind of man people underestimated because his power was quiet. That night, searching his home office for a contract folder, he opened the wrong drawer. Inside was an unsealed manila envelope. Inside that envelope was a fully prepared divorce petition, filed 3 weeks ago, without a word to him, demanding 90% of everything Jerome Wade had ever built. His business, his properties, his home. A cash settlement on top of it all. Jerome sat completely still for 4 minutes. Then he photographed every page, replaced the envelope exactly as he found it, walked downstairs, and ate dinner across from his wife while she laughed at the television. She had no idea what she had just started. And she had no idea who she had underestimated. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The Atlanta sky was still black when Jerome Wade pulled into the job site. No sunrise yet, just the orange glow of work lights strung across the frame of a half-built commercial building, and the smell of wet concrete and fresh-cut lumber hanging in the cold morning air. Jerome parked his truck, grabbed his hard hat from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the dark. He stood still for a moment, just listened. The hum of a generator, the distant clank of a metal pipe being moved somewhere behind the scaffolding, the sound of his site waking up. He had been coming to job sites before sunrise for 16 years. He still hadn't gotten tired of it. "Morning, Mr. Wade." Marcus, his foreman, came around the side of the building with a set of blueprints folded under one arm and a thermos of coffee in his other hand. Marcus was 51, built like a man who had been pouring concrete since his 20s, and Jerome trusted him more than almost anyone on earth. "Marcus," Jerome shook his hand. "Walk me through it." They spread the blueprints across the hood of Jerome's truck, and Marcus pointed out 3 things that needed decisions before noon: a load-bearing adjustment, a supplier delay on the steel brackets, and a drainage issue on the east side of the foundation. Jerome listened to all of it before he said a single word. That was his way. He absorbed, he thought. And then he spoke. "Push the supplier for a Thursday delivery," Jerome said. "If they can't commit, call Hendricks and get somebody out here to look at that drainage before we pour anything else on that side." Marcus nodded like he had expected exactly that answer. Jerome made his way through the site as the crew filtered in. 14 men in total, some arriving in twos, stomping cold off their boots, reaching for hard hats and tool belts. They greeted Jerome the way men greet someone they actually respect. Not loud, not performative, just a nod, a morning, a handshake offered without any need to impress. Jerome stopped near the east wall where a younger worker, couldn't have been more than 25, was staring at a section of framing with the quiet panic of a man who knew something was wrong but hadn't figured out what yet. Jerome looked at it. He saw the problem in about 4 seconds. "Your spacing is off on the 3rd stud," he said. "Pull it out and reset it. You've got time before the inspection." The young man looked relieved and embarrassed. Jerome waved the embarrassment off. "Everybody misses one," he said. "What matters is whether you fix it." That was Jerome Wade. That had always been Jerome Wade. He had built Wade & Sons Construction from nothing. That word, nothing, was not a figure of speech. There was no inheritance, no loan from family, no financial cushion of any kind. At 26 years old, he had a used truck, a contractor's license, and a willingness to outwork every other man bidding on the same small jobs. He started with residential repairs, then small commercial work, then larger contracts. He reinvested every dollar back into the business for the first 5 years and paid himself barely enough to live on. Now he employed 14 men. He owned the family home in a quiet suburb south of Atlanta. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a yard Diana had planted herself. He had 2 investment properties that generated steady rental income. A warehouse on the east side of the city where he stored equipment. His accountant, his brother Darnell, had run the numbers recently. Total asset value, conservative estimate, just under $1.1 million. Jerome had built every single piece of it with his own hands and his own decisions. He was 42 years old, and he had never taken a shortcut that he was ashamed of. He got home a little after 6 that evening. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Diana had her good playlist going in the kitchen, the one with the slow R&B she liked on weekends and, increasingly, on weeknights too. The table was set. There were candles. Diana turned from the stove when he came in and smiled at him. It was a warm smile. Beautiful, even. She had always been beautiful. 39 years old, and she carried herself like a woman who knew it without needing to announce it. "You're right on time," she said, and kissed him on the cheek. Jerome said the right things. He washed his hands, sat down, and ate across from his wife. The food was good. The conversation was easy. Diana told him something funny that happened at her spin class, and he laughed because it was actually funny. She refilled his water without being asked. She asked about the job site. Jerome answered her question. He watched her face while he did. The warmth was real enough. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that it had started to feel like a performance. The right amount of warmth, in the right amounts, at the right times. Like something being maintained rather than felt. He had no evidence of that. Just a low, quiet feeling that he had been carrying for a while now and hadn't been able to name. He pushed it aside. He always pushed it aside. After dinner, he went to his home office to pull a contract folder he needed to review before a morning call. The folder was in the second drawer. That was where he always kept it. He opened the second drawer. The folder wasn't there. He checked the first drawer, found a stack of mail, a couple of utility bills, a notepad. He moved the notepad aside, and then he saw it. A manila envelope, unsealed, tucked beneath the stack, partially hidden but not completely, like something placed in a hurry, or placed by someone who assumed it wouldn't be found. Jerome stared at it for a moment. Something in his chest went very still. He picked it up. Inside was a document. Clean, printed, formatted with the kind of precision that meant it had been prepared by a professional. He pulled it out slowly and read the top of the first page. In the Superior Court of Fulton County, State of Georgia. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Diana Renee Wade. Petitioner, Jerome Anthony Wade. Respondent. The date in the upper right corner was 3 weeks ago. Jerome read further. His eyes moved down the page without hurry, without expression, the way a man reads something when he has decided that panic is not an option. He turned to the next page, then the next. The demand was laid out clearly. 90% of all marital assets, Wade and Sons Construction, both investment properties, the family home, a cash settlement drawn from business accounts, 90%. Everything he had ever built. Jerome stood in that office for 4 minutes without moving. He counted them on the clock above his desk without meaning to. 4 minutes of absolute silence, absolute stillness, with the document open in his hands. Then he took out his phone. He photographed every page, slowly, carefully, making sure every line was legible in every frame. When he was done, he slid the document back into the envelope. He positioned the envelope exactly where he had found it, beneath the notepad, the right amount of visible, the right amount of hidden. He closed the drawer. He walked downstairs. Diana was on the couch, with her feet tucked under her, laughing at something on television. The candles were still lit on the dining table behind her, The kitchen smelled like clean dishes. Jerome sat down in the armchair across from her. He watched her laugh, easy and bright, and completely unbothered, and he said nothing at all. Jerome did not sleep. He lay on his side of the bed in the dark, hands folded across his chest, eyes open. Diana breathed slowly beside him, deep and even. The sleep of someone with a clear conscience, or someone who had decided their conscience didn't matter anymore. Jerome listened to it for a while. Then he stopped listening and started thinking. 18 months. He went back through it the way you go through a job site after something fails, methodically, looking for the moment where the load-bearing piece gave way. The small withdrawals from their joint savings account that he had noticed, but not questioned, because they never hit a number that alarmed him. 2,000 here, 1,500 there. Diana handled the household budget. He had trusted that completely. The weekends visiting her sister in Savannah. 4 of them in the last year, maybe 5. Her sister Keisha was real enough. Jerome had met her at Christmas, had co-signed a car loan for her 18 months ago without being asked twice. But he had never thought to call Keisha directly during those weekends. He had sent Diana text messages, and she had answered them from what he assumed was Savannah. He had assumed. The gym bag in Diana's car, sometime in the spring. He had reached into the back seat looking for his sunglasses and caught the scent. Something clean and foreign. A man's cologne, light but unmistakable. Diana had been pulling out of the driveway when he asked about it. She said a coworker left his jacket in her car, and she had thrown it in the back. Jerome had accepted that. He had wanted to accept it. The wanting. That was the part that sat heaviest now. Not the lies. The wanting. He got up at 4:45. He dressed in the dark without turning on a light, moving quietly through the room the way he moved through a job site. Economically, without wasted motion. Diana didn't stir. Jerome looked at her one more time before he left the room. Then he picked up his keys and walked out of the house. Aunt Cora's place was 20 minutes south, a small brick ranch on a tree-lined street that she had owned outright for 15 years. The lights in her kitchen were already on when Jerome pulled up, which did not surprise him. Cora had never slept past 5 in her life. She met him at the door before he knocked. She looked at his face, then at his hands, then back at his face. She stepped aside to let him in without saying anything. Jerome sat at her kitchen table. He set his phone on the wood surface in front of her, already open to the first photograph. Cora sat down across from him. She picked up the phone. She read. She did not react. Not once. No sharp breath. No shake of the head. No muttered word. She moved through every page with the flat, focused attention of someone who had spent 3 decades reading legal documents for a living, and had learned long ago that reacting to paper helped no one. When she was done, she set the phone down gently and went to the counter and poured 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Jerome. "You haven't done anything yet," she said. It was not a question. "No." "Good." She sat back down. "You don't do a single thing until you know everything. Not one thing." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Who is the attorney?" Jerome had noticed the name, but hadn't recognized it. He told her. Cora's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. She got up and went to the small desk in the corner of her kitchen where she kept her laptop. She opened it and typed for less than a minute. Then she turned the screen toward Jerome. Philip Okafor, attorney at law, family law, and high-asset divorce. Atlanta, Georgia. The website was polished and expensive-looking. The bio was long. There were press mentions, local business journals, a few legal publications. His win rate in high-asset divorce cases was listed without apology. Jerome read it. His jaw tightened once. Then it was still. Cora turned the laptop back around and kept reading. Jerome drank his coffee. Outside, the first gray light of morning was beginning to show through the kitchen window. After a few minutes, Cora looked up. "Okafor doesn't come cheap," she said. "That man's retainer alone is probably $15,000–$20,000. She looked at Jerome steadily. "Somebody's been paying him for a while." Jerome sat with that for a moment. Then he reached for his phone and dialed his brother. Darnell picked up on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant Jerome had raised him right to be suspicious of a call this early. "It's me," Jerome said. "I need you on a secured line." A pause. Then, "Give me 2 minutes." Jerome waited. When Darnell called back, Jerome told him everything. He spoke in a low, even voice. He did not leave anything out. When he finished, there was a silence on the other end that lasted about 4 seconds. Then Darnell said, "When's the last time you actually looked at your joint accounts?" Jerome opened the banking app while they were still on the phone. The account loaded slowly. Jerome watched the spinning circle on his screen with the patience of a man who had learned, over 16 years of running a business, that the numbers always told the truth eventually. You just had to wait for them. Then the transaction history appeared. He scrolled up, then further still. "Darnell," he said quietly. "I see it," Darnell said. He couldn't. He was on a phone line, not looking at Jerome's screen. But the silence on his end said he already knew what was there. "Read me the oldest one you can find." Jerome scrolled to the bottom of the list. 18 months ago. November 3rd. $2,000. Transfer to external account. He read the account number. It ended in 4 digits he had never seen before. "Keep going," Darnell said. Jerome read them all. It took a while. His voice stayed flat and even, the way you read measurements on a job site. Not because you feel nothing, but because feeling something right now costs you accuracy. 31 transfers over 18 months. Some were 2,000. Some were 2,500. The largest single transfer was $3,500. Never more than that. All of them to the same external account, ending in the same 4 digits. When Jerome was done reading, he added them up in his head. He was close enough. $87,000, Darnell said. The words landed on the table like something heavy. Give or take. Cora had been listening from across the table. She did not move. Her coffee sat untouched. She was coached, Darnell said. His voice was careful and controlled, but Jerome could hear something underneath it, something hot and pressurized, trying to find the edges of a container. Those transfer amounts, that timing, you keep each one under a threshold so it doesn't flag. You space them out. You run them alongside your real household expenses so the pattern disappears into the noise. A pause. Somebody walked her through this step by step. Somebody who knows exactly how forensic accountants look for dissipation. Jerome said, Okafor. That's my read, Darnell said. This didn't come from Diana. Diana's smart, but this is a system. Somebody designed this. Jerome set the phone down on the table, screen up. Darnell still on the line. He looked at Cora. Cora looked back at him. Now we build the file, she said. They worked through the morning without rushing. Cora cleared the kitchen table completely and brought out a legal pad, 2 highlighters, yellow and orange, and a folder she found in her desk. Jerome transferred every photograph of the petition pages from his phone to her laptop, using the cable she kept in the drawer by the stove. He exported the transaction history from the banking app in the same way, screenshot by screenshot, organized by date. Darnell stayed on the phone for the first hour, talking Jerome through which transactions to flag, and in what order. He had the precise, unhurried voice of a man solving a problem that mattered to him personally, which it did, in a way Jerome didn't need to say out loud, and Darnell didn't need to hear. Flag every transfer that falls within 3 days of a legitimate household expense, Darnell said. Utility bills, groceries, anything that shows up as normal budget activity. That's the camouflage. The side-by-side comparison is what makes the coaching visible. Jerome flagged. Cora highlighted. By the time the morning light had gone from gray to full gold through the kitchen window, the folder was organized and complete. The petition photographs came first. Behind them, the flagged transaction history in chronological order. Behind that, Darnell's preliminary notes, typed and emailed within the hour, documenting the transfer pattern in the precise language of forensic accounting. Jerome looked at the folder sitting on Cora's kitchen table. It was an inch thick. It did not look like much. It was everything. He met with the attorney at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Her name was Renata Osei. She was not a divorce attorney. She was a forensic financial litigator. The distinction mattered, and Jerome had asked Cora to make sure he understood it before he walked into her office. Divorce attorneys argued the terms of a marriage ending. Forensic financial litigators argued what had been taken, how it had been hidden, and what the law required to be returned. Jerome sat across from her desk and set the folder down. She read for 22 minutes without looking up. She asked 2 questions during that time, both of them clarifying details about transfer dates. Jerome answered both from memory. When she finished, she set the folder down and looked at him directly. "These transfers," she said, "constitute marital asset dissipation under Georgia's equitable distribution statute." She said it plainly, without theatrics, the way Jerome said things. That classification carries significant legal weight. It restructures how the court evaluates the entire asset picture. She paused. "You came to me before she filed officially?" "She hasn't filed yet," Jerome said. Renata Osei looked at him for a moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out a client intake form. "Good," she said. Jerome made dinner that evening. Grilled chicken, rice, the green beans Diana liked. Diana came in from wherever she had been at 6:15, set her bag on the chair by the door, and smiled when she saw the table set. She asked about his day. He told her it was fine. She talked about a co-worker's drama that he did not track closely. He listened, or appeared to. He passed her the green beans when she reached for them. She noticed nothing different about him at all. The process server found Jerome at 9:47 on a Thursday morning. Jerome was crouched beside a concrete form, checking a measurement with his foreman Marcus, when he heard the unfamiliar car pull up on the gravel lot. He registered it the way he registered everything on a job site, without turning his head, without stopping what he was doing. A white sedan. A man in a blue button-down shirt stepping out with a clipboard and an envelope. Jerome already knew what it was. He stood up slowly, handed the measuring tape back to Marcus, and walked toward the man. His boots were dusty. His work gloves were still on. He did not hurry. "Jerome Allen Wade," the man said. "That's me," Jerome said. The man held out the envelope. "You've been served." Jerome took it. He did not open it. He tucked it under his arm and turned back to Marcus, like the man in the blue shirt had simply handed him a supply invoice. But he felt his crew watching. He felt the site go a half-degree quieter. Not silent, never fully silent, but the particular stillness that spreads through a group of men when they sense something significant has just happened. Marcus was looking at him with a question on his face that he was too professional to ask out loud. Jerome said, "Waterline in Section 3 needs another look before we pour. Walk with me." Marcus walked with him. Jerome never opened the envelope on the site. He didn't need to. He already knew every word inside it. What Diana had told people was that she had tried. She'd told her friend Keisha that Jerome was cold, that he worked all the time and came home with nothing left for her. She'd told her mother that he kept her away from the finances, that she never really knew what they had or where it went. She'd told Sister Mitchell at church that she'd been praying about the marriage for a long time, and that sometimes God releases you from something that was never right to begin with. She had said all of this carefully, in the right order, to the right people, spread across the right number of weeks, so it didn't sound like a campaign. It sounded like grief. like the quiet unraveling of a woman who had stayed patient for too long. By the Thursday morning, the process server drove out to Jerome's job site. Diana had already moved her things into the guest room. She had already called a moving company and scheduled them for Saturday. She had already spoken to Philip twice that week. Brief calls, clipped and professional in tone, but both of them smiling on their ends of the line. She believed she held every card. What Diana did not know: 48 hours after Jerome found the envelope in the wrong drawer, Renata Osei had filed an emergency motion to freeze all joint marital assets, citing documented financial misconduct in the form of 31 structured transfers totaling $87,000 deliberately patterned to avoid detection. The motion had been granted. What Diana did not know: Renata had simultaneously filed a conflict of interest complaint with the State Bar of Georgia against Philip Okafor. The basis for that filing had come from Aunt Cora, who had spent one long evening on the phone with a retired court clerk she had known for 23 years. That clerk remembered a community magazine, the kind that covered charity events and nonprofit galas, with glossy photographs and careful captions. From 14 months ago, the photograph showed Diana and Okafor standing together at a fundraiser for an Atlanta Arts Foundation. They were not standing like attorney and client. They were standing arm in arm, turned slightly toward each other, her hand resting on the front of his jacket. Both dressed in coordinating deep blue, both laughing. The caption named them. The date was printed clearly below. That photograph predated Diana's formal retention of Okafor as her divorce attorney by 6 full months. 6 months during which Okafor had been her romantic partner, during which he had helped her design a legal strategy against her husband, during which he had coached her, step by careful step, through the structured transfer of $87,000 in marital assets. Cora had found the magazine in the archive of a library database at 11:30 at night and had emailed it to Jerome without a single word of commentary. The image said everything that needed to be said. Diana arrived at the courthouse that morning, like a woman walking into something she had already won. She wore a charcoal blazer and low heels. She had her leather portfolio under one arm. Okafor walked beside her, composed and immaculate in a dark suit, his posture carrying the easy confidence of a man who had never lost a case he considered important. They did not speak much in the hallway. They didn't need to. Renata Osei was already inside. Jerome sat beside her at the respondent's table. He was in a clean gray shirt and dark slacks. His hands were flat on the table. He had not looked at Diana when she walked in, and he did not look at her now. The judge reviewed the filings, all 3 of them, simultaneously. The freeze motion, the forensic financial report, the conflict of interest complaint, with the photograph attached as Exhibit A. Okafor saw the complaint before the judge spoke. Jerome watched him read it, watched the stillness come over him, the particular stillness of a man whose footing has just disappeared from under him. The judge did not take long. The asset petition was suspended pending a full forensic audit of all marital finances. Okafor was removed from the case pending bar review. A date was set. Parties were advised. It was over in 11 minutes. Diana stood in the hallway outside the courtroom doors. Her portfolio was still under her arm. Her heels were still on. Everything about her looked the same as when she had walked in, but her face had changed completely. She was crying, not the soft, practiced kind she had offered to Keisha and Sister Mitchell and her mother in all those careful conversations. This was something else, something involuntary. Her chin was trembling and her eyes were wet, and she was staring at a point on the hallway floor that held nothing at all. Okafor was already on his phone 6 feet away, his voice low and tightly controlled. Jerome walked out of the courtroom behind Renata. He passed Diana in the hallway. He did not stop. He did not look at her for longer than a single second, just long enough to register that she understood. 18 months of planning. 48 hours to take it apart. He put his sunglasses on and walked toward the exit. The Monday after the hearing, Diana hired a new attorney. Jerome found out through Renata, who found out through a court notification. The new attorney's name was Marcus Holt. Younger, less experienced, a solo practitioner who handled mostly straightforward divorces in Fulton County. Not the kind of man Okafor was, not even close. Jerome received this information, nodded once, and went back to reviewing a materials order for a job in Decatur. He did not discuss it with his crew. He did not call Darnell about it. He simply filed it in the back of his mind the way he filed everything, cleanly, without clutter, and returned to work. That was the thing Diana had never understood about him. She had expected him to fall apart when the papers were served. She had expected the public humiliation of being served at his own job site to crack something in him, to make him reactive, sloppy, emotional. She had staged it that way on purpose. She knew Marcus would be standing right there. She knew the crew would be watching. What she did not know was that Jerome had been carrying that envelope in his chest for weeks already. By the time the process server put the physical copy in his hands, Jerome was the calmest man on that gravel lot. He returned to the site every morning that week, at the same time he always did. He reviewed blueprints. He walked the section. He stopped to help a younger worker named Terrell re-anchor a frame that wasn't sitting square, showing him the correction without making him feel small about the mistake. His foreman Marcus watched all of this and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Jerome was still Jerome. That was its own kind of message, even if no one else was reading it. Darnell called on a Wednesday evening. Jerome was sitting in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware supplier, engine running, when his phone lit up with his brother's name. He answered before the second ring. "I need you at Cora's," Darnell said. No greeting? No small talk? Just that. Jerome recognized the tone immediately. It was the same voice Darnell used when the numbers in a client's books told him something deeply wrong had been happening for a long time. "When?" Jerome said. "Tonight." Aunt Cora had coffee ready when they arrived. She didn't ask questions. She set 3 mugs on the kitchen table and sat down and waited. Because she had learned 30 years ago that when a man brings documents to a table, you let the documents speak first. Darnell set them down in 2 stacks. Formation papers on the left, bank records on the right. He gave them a moment to look, then started talking. The $87,000 was never in Diana's personal account, he said. Not a single dollar of it. Every transfer, all 31 of them, went directly into a business account. He tapped the formation papers. An LLC registered 14 months ago in the state of Georgia. Jerome looked at the document. The LLC had 2 members listed: Diana Renee Wade, Philip A. Okafor. It has no stated business purpose, Darnell continued. His voice was steady, but Jerome could see the tension in his jaw, the effort it took to stay in the language of facts when fury was sitting right underneath. No contracts on file, no invoices, no clients, no operations of any kind. It was opened, it received funds, and it sat there. He paused. "Jerome, this thing was built for one reason: to catch your money and hold it somewhere you couldn't reach it." The kitchen was quiet. Cora wrapped both hands around her mug, but didn't drink from it. She was watching Jerome the way she always watched him in these moments, not with worry, but with the close attention of someone making sure a structure she trusted was still standing. Jerome looked at the bank records. He looked at the formation papers. He looked at both members' names printed on the registration document, his wife's name and her attorney's name, on a business entity created 14 months ago, 6 months before she ever formally hired him as her lawyer. 6 months of planning, 31 transfers, an LLC with no purpose except to swallow what he had spent 16 years building, dollar by dollar, so quietly he almost didn't notice. "She wasn't just leaving you," Darnell said. The words came out with a hard, flat precision. She was robbing you, and he built her the tool to do it. Jerome sat with that for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. He photographed every page, both stacks, front and back, in the clean light of Cora's kitchen. He opened his email, attached everything, and typed 4 words to Renata Ose. See attached. Call me. He set the phone face down on the table and looked at his brother. Renata will file the civil fraud claim in the morning, he said. Darnell nodded. Jerome was quiet for another moment. Then he picked up his phone again and scrolled to a different name. He stared at it briefly, not hesitating, just making sure. He pressed call. It rang twice before the man picked up. Pastor Boone, Jerome said. It's Jerome Wade. I'm sorry for the late hour. I need to ask you for some of your time. Jerome's office was not a fancy place. It was a converted room at the back of the Wade and Sons yard. Concrete floor, industrial shelving along one wall, a wide desk that had seen better days, and a window that looked out over the equipment lot. Blueprints were stacked in labeled tubes in the corner. A whiteboard covered in measurements and job codes took up most of the back wall. The room smelled like coffee and sawdust and work. Jerome had chosen this location deliberately. Not the attorney's office, not a restaurant, not anywhere that belonged to Diana's world or Diana's narrative. His office, his ground. Pastor Winston Boone arrived at 8:15 in the morning, 5 minutes early, in a dark gray overcoat and a pressed shirt with no tie. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped silver hair, and the unhurried posture of someone who had learned long ago that stillness carried its own kind of authority. He shook Jerome's hand at the door with both of his. "Jerome," he said. His voice was low and careful. "Pastor." Jerome stepped back and let him in. "Thank you for coming." Jerome poured them both coffee without asking. He set the mugs on the desk and sat down across from Boone. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. The yard outside was already coming to life, the sound of an engine turning over, someone calling to someone else across the gravel. Then Jerome opened the folder on the desk. He did not rush. He did not explain ahead of the documents. He simply laid each page down, one at a time, the way a man sets bricks, level, deliberate, patient. First, the LLC formation papers, Diana's name, Okafor's name, the registration date, 14 months ago. Boone looked at them. He didn't pick them up yet. He just looked. Second, the transfer records, all 31 of them, the amounts, the dates, the destination account. $87,000, moved in careful, quiet pieces over 18 months, all of it flowing into that same LLC. Third, the photograph. It was printed on plain paper, pulled from a community magazine's website, time-stamped from a charity gala 14 months ago. Diana stood beside Philip Okafor in a room full of dressed-up people, and they were not standing the way a client stands beside an attorney. They were standing the way two people stand when they are not thinking about how they look, because they are not thinking about anything except each other. His hand on the small of her back, her head tilted toward him, laughing at something he'd said. Coordinating outfits, his tie, her dress, the same deep burgundy. 14 months ago, half a year before Diana ever formally hired him. Boone picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Jerome drank his coffee and waited. The pastor set the photograph down and looked at the transfer records again. Then the formation papers. Then back at the photograph. His jaw moved slightly, the way a man's jaw moves when he is holding something inside that wants to come out differently. When he finally looked up, his eyes were steady, but something behind them had shifted. The specific look of a principled man who has just understood exactly how his goodness was used against someone else. "She told me," he started, then stopped. He pressed his lips together. "She came to me 10 months ago. She told me the marriage had broken down, that you were closed off, that she felt invisible in her own home." He paused. "I believed her, Jerome. I had no reason not to." "I know that," Jerome said. "I spoke on her behalf, not in court, but to people, to her mother, to members of the congregation." Boone's voice dropped. "I gave her my credibility because I thought I was helping a woman in pain." "You were trying to do right by someone you trusted," Jerome said. "That's not on you." Boone looked at him with something close to surprise, like he had expected, and perhaps deserved, more anger than he was receiving. Jerome folded his hands on the desk. "I'm not asking you to testify. I'm not asking you to take a side or make a statement or go to war with anybody." He looked at the pastor directly. "I'm asking you to be present at a final meeting, before any settlement is signed. All parties in the same room. And when you're there, I'm only asking you to be honest." Boone was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the documents spread across the desk, the paper record of 18 months of planning, executed against a man who had never been anything but steady. Then he looked up. "Jerome," he said, "I owe you my honesty." Jerome nodded once. He stood, came around the desk, and extended his hand. Boone stood and shook it, firm, both hands again, the same way he had at the door, but different now. The gesture meant something different now. Diana called that afternoon. Jerome was back on the job site in Decatur, walking a section with his foreman, when his phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. He told his foreman he'd be right back, and he stepped away from the noise, toward the tree line at the edge of the lot. He pressed the button to record the call first. One tap. Legal in Georgia. No notification required. Then he answered. "Diana." "Jerome." Her voice was warm, carefully warm, the same temperature it had been across 100 dinners, 100 ordinary evenings. "I've been thinking. I think we got off on the wrong foot with all of this." He said nothing. "I want to be fair to you," she continued. "I do. I think 60% is a much more reasonable place for us to land, if you're willing to let the LLC thing go. That was a misunderstanding." There was nothing sinister about it. Jerome listened to every word. He kept his breathing even. He watched a hawk circle slowly above the tree line, riding the warm air without moving its wings. "I appreciate the call, Diana," he said. Then he hung up. He stood there for one more moment, looking up at the hawk. Then he opened his email, attached the recording, and typed 4 words to Renata. "Listen to this. Today." He put the phone in his pocket and walked back to his foreman. "Where were we?" he said. The subpoena results came back on a Wednesday. Jerome was at his desk when Renata called. She didn't lead with pleasantries. That was one of the things he appreciated about her. She spoke like a surgeon, clean and direct. "The LLC account records are in," she said. "I need you to look at something." He drove to her office that afternoon. She had the documents spread across her conference table, flagged in 2 places with yellow sticky notes. Jerome looked where she pointed. The first flag, a wire transfer, $12,000, sent 14 months ago, 3 days after the LLC was formed. The originating account belonged to Margaret Holloway, Diana's mother. The second flag, another wire, $8,500, sent 6 weeks later. Originating account, a joint checking account held in the names of Diana Wade and Keisha Holloway, Diana's younger sister. Jerome stood over the table and read both entries twice. He did not sit down. He did not say anything for a moment. He just stood there, very still, looking at the numbers. Margaret Holloway, whose mortgage was 3 months behind in 2022, whose phone rang at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, panicked and crying, and Jerome had picked up. Jerome had called his bank the next morning and wired the difference himself. No paperwork, no conditions, because she was family. Keisha Holloway, whose car note she couldn't cover the year before. who had called Diana, and Diana had come to Jerome, and Jerome had co-signed the loan without hesitation because Keisha was 29 years old and trying to get her footing, and that's what you do for people who are trying. These were not strangers. These were women who had sat at his dinner table, women who had hugged him at Christmas, women whose financial emergencies he had quietly absorbed without complaint or expectation of anything back. And they had wired money, their own money, or what passed for it, into a shell company designed to drain him. Jerome straightened up. "All right," he said quietly. He did not call Renata about next steps. Not yet. He thanked her, picked up a copy of the records, and walked back to his truck. He called Margaret first. He kept his voice even. He told her he wanted to sit down, privately, before the civil case moved any further, that he thought some things needed to be said face to face, between people who knew each other. He said he was asking Diana and Keisha to be there too. Margaret was quiet on the phone for longer than was comfortable. Then she said, "Okay, Jerome." He called Keisha next. She sounded guarded before he'd finished the first sentence. But she said yes. He texted Diana last. "My aunt's house, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Come." Diana responded 20 minutes later. "Okay." Aunt Cora's living room was not large. It was warm and clean and filled with 30 years of accumulated life. Framed photographs on the walls, a shelf of thick binders from her paralegal days, a rug worn soft underfoot from decades of foot traffic. She had set out coffee and glasses of water on the side table without anyone asking her to. Cora herself sat in the armchair in the corner, hands folded in her lap, saying nothing. She had dressed like she was going to church. Jerome had told her what was coming, and she had simply said, "I'll be here." Margaret arrived first, with Keisha beside her. Margaret was 58, small and soft-spoken, with Diana's same wide eyes and careful posture. Keisha was taller, quieter by nature, with her arms crossed before she even sat down. Diana came last. She wore no makeup. That was the first thing Jerome noticed. She had not performed for this room. They sat on the couch and the love seat, the three of them arranged in a loose triangle. Jerome stood at the table. He did not sit. He opened the folder. He laid the documents down one at a time. The LLC formation papers, the transfer records from the marital accounts, then the 2 bank records, each with its originating account name printed clearly at the top. Margaret Holloway, $12,000. Diana Wade. Keisha Holloway, $8,500. He set them down slowly, the way he always did. Level, patient, no theatrics. Margaret looked at the papers for 5 seconds. Then her face crumpled, and she started to cry. Not soft tears, but the kind that come from somewhere deep. The kind a person can't stop once it starts. Keisha stared at the document with her name on it. She did not cry. She did not speak. She seemed to stop breathing. Her arms, still crossed, tightened against her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. Diana looked at the table, not at the documents, at the table itself, at the worn wood grain beneath them, like she was somewhere else entirely. Jerome looked at all 3 of them. He took his time. Then he said it. "I don't want your apology." His voice was calm, completely calm. "I want you to understand that I have everything." He closed the folder. He picked it up off the table. He walked out of the room first. Renata's conference room was on the 14th floor of a glass office building in Midtown Atlanta. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long rectangular table in dark wood, 8 chairs, a credenza along the far wall holding a coffee service nobody touched. The room felt expensive. That was the point. Jerome arrived first, at 8:45. He set his folder on the table in front of his chair, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stood at the window looking out at the city while the room filled around him. Darnell came in next, in a dark gray suit, a banker's briefcase under his arm. He and Jerome exchanged a look, but didn't speak. There was nothing left to plan. everything had already been planned. Aunt Cora arrived wearing the same composed expression she had worn at every step of this. The face of a woman who had spent 3 decades watching courtrooms decide who walked away whole. She sat 2 chairs down from Jerome's position at the table and set her hands flat on the surface. Ready. Diana's new attorney came in at 9:02. His name was Marcus Fels, mid-30s, pressed suit, the careful energy of a man who had read the file and understood exactly how thin his position was. He nodded at Renata. He did not look at Jerome. Diana walked in behind him. She wore a cream blouse and dark slacks. Her hair was neat. Her face was composed in the way that requires real effort. The muscles just slightly too controlled, the jaw just slightly too still. She did not look at Jerome either. Pastor Winston Boone entered last. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair, and the slow, deliberate walk of someone who knew that his presence already carried weight before he said a word. He wore a dark suit and no tie. He nodded at Jerome when he came through the door. Jerome nodded back. Diana saw him, and something moved across her face. A flicker. Gone in less than a second. But Jerome caught it. Renata waited until everyone was seated. Then she stood at the head of the table, opened her binder, and began. She was precise. That was the only word for it. Document by document. Transfer by transfer. Each exhibit placed on the table and named aloud before she moved to the next one. The joint account statements. 18 months of transfers, each one flagged, each one dated, and totaled. $87,000, assembled patiently over a year and a half, in amounts small enough to read as noise. The LLC formation papers. Diana Wade and Philip Okafor, co-members, filed 14 months ago. No stated business purpose, no contracts, no operations. A shell built specifically to hold what was taken. The banking records for the LLC account. Every deposit logged, including the 2 wires, Margaret Holloway's $12,000, Keisha's $8,500, both flagged in yellow, both sitting on the table where everyone in the room could read them clearly. The gala photograph. Diana and Okafor, arm in arm, both dressed to match, both laughing. Dated 14 months before Diana ever claimed the marriage had broken down. Dated 6 months before she formally retained him as her attorney. The phone recording. Renata did not play it aloud, but she placed the transcript in front of Fels without comment. He read the first 2 lines. He set it down carefully. Fels tried to speak twice. The first time, he had barely gotten 3 words out before Renata cut across him without raising her voice. "Mr. Fels, you'll have your opportunity." The second time, she simply looked at him and waited. He stopped. The record was complete in 41 minutes. The room was very quiet. Jerome set both hands flat on the table and looked at Diana directly for the first time since they had stood in the courthouse hallway 7 weeks ago. She met his eyes. She didn't look away. He gave her that. "I would have given you the world," he said. His voice was low, even. He didn't rush it. "If you had come to me honestly, if you had told me you were unhappy, told me you wanted out, I would have sat down with you and made it fair. I would have walked away from things I built with my own hands, if that's what it took. Because that's what a person does, when they respect the one they're leaving." He paused. "What you couldn't account for was that I was paying attention. I was always paying attention. You just decided that meant I wasn't smart enough to see." He looked at the folder in front of him, then back at her. "You don't get to keep what my hands built." Silence. Then Pastor Boone leaned forward slightly in his chair. He did not look at Jerome. He looked only at Diana, and his voice, when it came, was quiet, not harsh, not theatrical, just honest in the way that cuts deeper than anger ever could. "Diana," he said, "I've known you for 7 years. I married you and Jerome in my church. When you came to me, I believed you. I didn't have any reason not to." He gestured once, briefly, toward the documents on the table. "Now I do." He folded his hands. "I was used as a witness for something that wasn't true. I want you to know I understand that now, and I will not offer any further testimony on your behalf. Not in any proceeding. Not in any form." He sat back. Diana's composure broke all at once, the way a thing breaks when it has been held too tightly for too long. Her face crumpled, and she pressed one hand over her mouth, and the sound that came out of her was not grief. It was something rawer than that. It was the sound of a person who had built a careful story around herself for 18 months, told it to everyone who mattered, arranged witnesses and documentation and social currency around it, and was now sitting in a room where every single one of those things had been taken apart, piece by piece, in front of the one person whose good opinion she had counted on most. Marcus Fels placed a hand on her arm. No one else in the room moved toward her. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was the thing nobody tells you about justice. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like paperwork, filings and responses, and scheduled hearings and procedural motions and court dates on a shared calendar. Jerome went to work every morning. He reviewed contracts. He supervised pours. He signed off on material deliveries and checked his crew's hours and returned phone calls. He let the system do what the system does when you give it something real to work with. The bar review against Philip Okafor concluded on a Wednesday. Jerome's attorney, Renata, called him with the result at 11 a.m. He was standing outside a half-framed structure in Decatur, coffee going cold in his hand. The finding was straightforward. Okafor had entered into a romantic relationship with Diana Wade no later than 14 months before she formally retained him as her attorney. During that period, he provided her with legal strategy, advised her on asset transfer methodology, and co-formed a business entity designed to receive and shelter marital funds. He then represented her as opposing counsel in litigation he had personally helped design. The Georgia State Bar used the phrase conflict of interest 11 times in their summary. They used the phrase conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice twice. His license was suspended for 18 months, effective immediately, pending a full ethics hearing. The Okafor Law Group closed its doors 14 days later. His two associates found positions elsewhere. His paralegals sent out a form letter to active clients. The office in Buckhead, the one with the framed press clippings and the reputation built over 15 years, went quiet. Jerome heard all of this through Renata. He did not seek the information out. It arrived, and he received it, and he went back to whatever he was doing. The LLC was dissolved by court order on a Thursday afternoon. The judge's language was plain. The entity had been formed with no legitimate business purpose and had functioned solely as a vehicle to shelter funds dissipated from the marital estate. The account was frozen. The assets ordered returned. Diana and Okafor were jointly liable. The math, once the court finished with it, came out to this. The original $87,000. Margaret Holloway's $12,000. Keisha's $8,500. Every dollar, traced and documented by Darnell's forensic work, by Renata's filings, by a paper trail so complete that Diana's new attorney had stopped attempting to contest the figures 3 weeks into the process. With court-ordered penalties applied, the total returned to the marital estate came to just over $126,000. The divorce settlement was restructured entirely. Georgia's equitable distribution doctrine does not guarantee a 50-50 split. What it guarantees is a fair division of what the marriage actually produced. And when a court finds documented dissipation, documented fraud, and a coordinated scheme to strip a marital estate before proceedings begin, the calculus shifts considerably. Diana's new attorney filed 2 amended proposals before he finally advised her, in writing, to accept what the court was prepared to award. She received 9%, personal belongings, the car she had been driving, a 2021 Accord, purchased jointly, which Jerome had never disputed, a small allocation from the restored marital estate that, on paper, looked like something. She received no stake in Wade and Sons construction, no claim on either investment property, no claim on the family home, no cash settlement. Okafor, suspended and facing civil liability of his own, could no longer contribute to her legal costs. Marcus Fels, to his credit, had done competent work. He had simply been handed an unwinnable case. His fees, no longer absorbed by anyone but Diana, consumed nearly everything the 9% represented. Jerome's attorney never said the word victory when she spoke to him about it. She was too professional for that. But the numbers said everything that needed saying. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Jerome was on the site, a commercial renovation in College Park, a project his crew had been on for 6 weeks. He was walking the second floor with his foreman, Marcus, reviewing a framing issue near the east stairwell when his phone buzzed. Renata. He held up one finger to Marcus and stepped away. She told him the judgment had been signed. Her voice was measured, the same way it always was. She told him it was official, that the documentation would be filed with the clerk by end of day, and that she would send him a complete copy by evening. Jerome thanked her. He meant it. He came back to Marcus and said, quietly, that the paperwork was done. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he put out his hand. Jerome shook it. He called Darnell from the parking lot, standing next to his truck with the morning sun already warm on his shoulders. Darnell picked up on the second ring. "It's done," Jerome said. He heard Darnell exhale, a long, slow breath, and then his brother said, "Good." Just that. One word. The way men who understand each other sometimes communicate everything in a single syllable. He called Aunt Cora next. She picked up before the second ring. "It's done," he said again. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Come by this week," she said. "I'll cook." That evening, Jerome sat on the back porch of the house that was entirely his. The yard was dark beyond the porch light. Crickets in the hedgerow, the distant sound of a car on the street. He had his coffee in both hands, and he sat with it, and did not reach for his phone, and did not turn on any music. He drank his coffee in the quiet, and let the quiet be what it was. 14 months later, Jerome Wade pulled his truck into a job site he had been thinking about for 3 years. The permit board stood at the entrance, staked into the Georgia clay, white and clean in the early morning light. The name printed across the top of it, Wade and Sons Construction, was the same name it had always been. But the project behind it was not. This was a 4-story mixed-use commercial build in southwest Atlanta. Retail on the ground floor, office space above, a city contract, the kind of work that 2 years ago Jerome had been bidding on without winning, the kind of work that had felt, for a long time, like it was sitting just beyond his reach. His reach had gotten longer. He stood at the board for a moment, coffee thermos in his hand, and read his own name in the morning quiet. Then he put on his hard hat and walked the perimeter. The crew had grown. 3 new hires in the past year, all of them young, 2 of them fresh out of trade school, one of them a kid named Antoine, who had shown up with no experience and a willingness to outwork everyone around him. Jerome had hired him on the spot after watching him spend 20 minutes on a task he hadn't been asked to do because he noticed it needed doing. 14 men had become 17. The warehouse expansion, which had broken ground in the spring, had created enough additional storage and staging capacity to run 2 large projects simultaneously for the first time in the company's history. Wade and Sons now operated 2 trucks beyond the original fleet. Jerome had bought the second one used, the same way he bought the first one 16 years ago. He believed in that kind of continuity. 2 government contracts had been secured in the past 8 months, one through the city, one through the county. Both required documentation, compliance filings, and a financial audit that Darnell had prepared with the same forensic precision he had brought to the worst moment of Jerome's life. The irony was not lost on either of them. What Darnell built in crisis had become the foundation of the firm's most significant growth period. They had lunch every Thursday. Same diner off Cascade, same booth near the back. They talked business for the first half hour, and then they talked about everything else. It was the kind of rhythm that doesn't get built quickly. It had been building their whole lives, but the last 14 months had welded it into something permanent. Aunt Cora was not retired anymore. She had accepted what she called a consulting arrangement. Her words, spoken with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had found a second purpose, with Renata's firm, 3 days a week. Her institutional knowledge of Atlanta's family court system, her 30 years of contacts across clerks' offices and attorneys' practices and judges' chambers had proven, in Renata's words, immediately and consistently invaluable. Renata had said this to Jerome directly, without any prompting, which told him everything he needed to know about how it was going. Cora had called it her selective retirement. At 67, she had more energy than she had in years. Pastor Boone had reached out 6 months after the settlement was signed. He had called Jerome directly, not through the church, not through a third party. He said he had been thinking about something, and he wanted to ask Jerome a question. He wanted to know if Jerome would be willing to speak to a group of young men in the congregation, men in their 20s, most of them figuring out how to build something of their own, about what that process actually looked like. Jerome had said yes. He had been back 4 times. He did not preach, and he did not perform. He sat in a folding chair in the fellowship hall and answered questions honestly. He told them about the first truck. He told them about the years when he made payroll and couldn't pay himself. He told them about every mistake he made and what each one cost him, and what he learned from it. He did not tell them it was easy. He did not tell them it was worth it in the abstract. He showed them the math. The young men listened carefully. A few of them asked questions that told Jerome they had already been thinking harder than most people gave them credit for. He planned to go back. The last word Jerome received about Diana came from Darnell, second-hand, mentioned briefly over lunch, and not dwelled upon. Okafor's practice was gone. Diana had relocated to another county and was working retail management. Darnell had said it the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration. Jerome had nodded once and picked up his coffee cup. He did not comment. He did not feel what he might have expected to feel. The information arrived and passed through him like weather, like something that had happened far away to people he no longer had reason to think about. He went back to the contract on the table between them and asked Darnell a question about the Q3 projection, and that was the end of it. Now, Jerome stood on the new site and watched his crew move. Steel framing rising against an Atlanta sky that was pale and wide and just beginning to catch the morning light. The sound of work, metal on metal, voices calling measurements, boots on fresh concrete. His name on the permit board behind him. A young worker came up beside him. 22, maybe 23. He had been on the crew for 3 months and asked good questions and listened to the answers. He stood next to Jerome and looked up at the frame going up against the sky. "Mr. Wade," he said, "how long did it take you to get here?" Jerome looked at the steel rising. He looked at the Atlanta skyline stretching beyond it, gray and gold in the early light. He thought about the first truck. He thought about the first contract. He thought about every morning he had shown up, when showing up was the only thing he had to offer. "My whole life," he said, "every single day of it." He put on his hard hat and walked toward the work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.